We have two items down here that are seemingly unrelated one to another. You know, me and a guy over in Africa, we're basically unrelated to each other. It doesn't matter. Or a stone here and a stone on a Rocky Mountain. Doesn't matter. These are harmonic progressions, what general engineering considers as harmonic progressions. Whatever the frequency of this object is, if you double that, you get the harmonic progression or the harmonic series of this object. Okay, engineering uses that every day. It's a real simple concept. Music uses it every day. We could take something over here and we say it's fundamental. It's a little bit different. So we don't really see any correspondences in these numbers. However, basic arithmetic, as is found in music theory, and I want to stress this, is a musical universe because everything vibrates and vibrations are controlled or maintained by number, whole numbers, and how they interact with each other. Pythagoras had it answered 2,000 years ago, and he kind of got swept to the side because we had, or we have still today, a partial philosophy. We don't have a holistic viewpoint of nature. Those old philosophers studied many, many, many fields of subjects, especially music and astronomy and arithmetic, and they could see the correspondences between all these fields. Well, somehow we've gotten into a place now where we study one field and we pick that thing apart and we don't really know anything about any other fields. We've become specialists, and that has led us down some really bad paths. What we're trying to do here is show you how it can be all tied together very simply to the underlying principles that connect it all together. In music, it is maintained, and there's some music experts in here, and I'm not a music expert. I'm just learning like everybody else. If we take the aliquot parts of a given frequency, those are the numbers that add up to create a given number. Like it's factoring. You use factoring in algebra to come up with the aliquot parts of a given number. 2 is an aliquot part of 6, 12, 24, 48. So here we can see a connecting link between these numbers right now, right here. 2 will go into these. So we have a partial harmony or concordance established between these two separate, seemingly separated objects. Another thing that happens in music is called modulation. It's not very well understood by most lay people, but it's a real simple thing. Frequencies will add together and they will subtract. It's called additive and subtractive synthesis. We can take any of these numbers and add them together. This is what happens naturally in sound and vibration. So we can take 4 and 8 and we got 12, and look what happens. We get a correspondence over here directly with this seemingly separated, isolated object. I had a gentleman come to me a couple years ago and he says, we would like you to design a radionics machine that is operator independent on these high levels of the etheric sciences that Keely had been dealing in. And I said, it can't be done. No machine can ever be isolated from its operator. And this shows why. And we're going to go here a little bit further and show you why. Now these progressions of numbers can go up in frequency. This is going up in frequency, but they can also go down. So you got the exact same thing going down, only we get into the fractions. And this goes to infinity too. So what we just got done saying over here on this chart right here, the higher the frequency, the greater the energy content. Another phenomenon in sound, a basic rule of thumb is the higher the density of the media of propagation, the greater the velocity of propagation. That's a standard rule of thumb. If we go up here to an infinitely high level, we've got particles that have infinitely high energy content, and they've got infinitely small dimensions. Therefore, that realm has an infinitely high density. So the propagation of a wave through that media is going to be an infinite velocity. I mean, it's just common sense. So what happens when you pull a vacuum? How do you isolate this thing called negative attraction? If you pull a vacuum, what are you doing? You're pulling out the molecules, you're pulling out the atoms, the isotopes, and you're creating this space that does not have these larger, slower particles in it. But it's still got these really high, infinitely small particles in it. You can prove that just by looking at a vacuum chamber. You can see through it, which means it's got photons in it. You can broadcast radio waves through it, so it's got electrons in it. And if it's got those in it, it's got the smaller particles. When you get into these higher realms, let's assume that you could pull a vacuum of 100 psi, which modern science can't do. Keely claimed to have done it over and over and over again. What you have left in that chamber would be synonymous with this negative attractive energy because it wants to collapse itself. And what is in there? What would you say was in there? There's infinite energy in there. That's what's in there. And this shows how they're all connected together on the infinitely high levels. So this is the basis of how radionics machines operate. We can tune knobs. If you do the potentiometer thing, you're just tuning a certain potential in these instruments. You're setting up certain waveforms and frequencies. But you say, well, how does that propagate through the atmosphere? Well, it doesn't propagate through the atmosphere. It goes up this ladder and the high harmonics propagate through the atmosphere. Actually, it's in between the atmosphere. It doesn't go through the atmosphere at all. So it goes across to the target that has the same chord of frequencies. I think Sherry Edwards called it signature. That's a modern term for it, signature vibrations. Keely referred to it as chords of mass. So if you've got any given object, if we go back to this one chart, we can see that there's 3 major particles in here, and then there's 3 in each of those. So therefore, a molecule such as this has a fundamental tone, which is the frequency of this larger particle, generally speaking. But it has all these other frequencies in it too. And I think if we count to the 8th level, there's over 1,000 particles in this thing. So there's 1,000 different frequencies times 3 again. So it just goes on to infinity. So each object, material object, has a whole plenum of frequencies of which we need to identify the fundamental keynote tone. And the musicians understand keynotes and fundamental tones. Those are the tones at which a given object will vibrate or resonate. Music is a whole subject. We could talk for a week on music. Now I want to show you, in the ancient literature, they talk about materiality as an illusion. I'll show you where they came up with that. And it indeed is an illusion. These particles rotate on planes 90 degrees to each other. So this particle would go in a big circle like this. This one would go in a circle like that, and that one would go in an orbit like that. 3 planes of orbit, just like you see in modern physics. You got the 3 planes like that. So they spin at each other, around each other. This is not a shell. Even though Keely maintained there was a shell about this, the shell is a construct. There is no thing here. This line only defines the range of motion of these particles. So they'll rotate about each other, but they won't exceed this range. So it's like a bicycle wheel. If you spin it real fast, you can't really shove a stick through it. If you spun it at an infinite velocity, which this almost is, you couldn't shoot a bullet through it or hit it in an atom smash or anything else. You're not going to penetrate this range of motion. So there really is nothing here. The same thing with these particles here. These things rotating inside this thing, this is just a range of motion. There's no object here. There's no hard shell here. On down into the infinite level. So when you get all done, it's like peeling an onion. There's nothing there. There is no thing there. So that's where the ancients got that thing about it's all energy. There's no materiality as an illusion, because it is. Now another thing Keely dealt with is kind of extraordinary, and we're just now beginning to get the idea that maybe we can do this too. All the frequencies of this molecule are in harmony with each other. That's like what we got done drawing here. If they're all in harmony with each other, they will tend to stay together. The molecule holds